own affairs, Your Honor. She is confused, unstable, and a threat to herself. My father never even hesitated as he deceived the judge without shame. He dabbed at a staged tear. Casting a glance at the relatives, gathered to witness my disgrace, I didn't scream. I didn't protest. I simply checked my wristwatch quietly. 3 minutes. That was all the time he had remaining before everything he built collapsed completely. Be honest. Have you ever had someone stare straight into your eyes and fabricate lies about you to paint themselves as the wounded party? Drop a yes below. If you truly understand that hollow, suffocating feeling, I want to count how many among us have endured and survived this quiet kind of betrayal and manipulation. Walter lowered himself back into his chair, adjusting his tie carefully like he had just concluded a somber funeral speech. The courtroom air grew dense and suffocating, heavy with silent judgment from aunts and cousins seated in the crowded back. They were anticipating collapse. They were expecting Roddy, the 29-year-old disappointment, the family's failure, the so-called unstable child, to break apart publicly. They waited for tears. They waited for pleading. They waited for hysteria. But I remained still, did not blink. I sat upright, breathing the stale probate courtroom air slowly and deliberately. I allowed the silence to stretch longer and longer, till discomfort settled over everyone present except for me alone. Miss Roddy, Judge Morrison said softly, peering above the rim of her glasses with measured seriousness. Your father has presented extremely serious accusations regarding your mental stability and your management of the family estate. Do you wish to respond to these claims? Walter leaned forward slightly, a hunter sensing vulnerability. He craved an eruption. He required visible chaos to validate his narrative. He depended on emotional turmoil like currency. If I shouted, he would triumph immediately. If I wept openly, he would secure victory, so I offered nothing. I rose carefully, smoothing the front of my blazer with steady fingers. I avoided the gallery. I avoided the judge for a measured second. Instead, I looked straight at Walter without expression. My face remained blank, stripped of fury, stripped of fear, stripped of any trace of hurt, in psychological terminology. This strategy is known as the gray rock method of defense. You become stone. You become dull, unremarkable, emotionless. It's entirely unresponsive. You deprive the narcissist of the emotional fuel they desperately require to maintain its control and power. But Walter failed to realize my quietness was not the silence of someone shattered or defeated. I was silent because I was documenting everything Miss Roddy. The judge repeated with firm patience. I'm listening, Your Honor, I replied calmly, voice steady and controlled. I'm merely waiting for my father to complete his catalog of complaints. I would hate to interrupt such a carefully rehearsed performance today. Walter's confident smirk wavered almost imperceptibly. He shifted slightly, leaning toward his attorney, Stephen, murmuring something urgent. Stephen was not smiling. Stephen was perspiring noticeably. He kept tapping his pen anxiously against his yellow legal pad. Asterisk, a nervous tic I'd noticed 3 months earlier. When I began quietly mapping all their movements, Stephen understood something Walter remained completely unaware of in his arrogance. He understood that paperwork always creates a visible and permanent trail behind. And he knew precisely which documents they falsified to secure this hearing. I shifted my gaze back toward Walter confidently. He sat there self-assured, swollen, with arrogance, inflated by the narrative he'd fed the family for so many years, that he was the long-suffering patriarch desperately supporting a fragile, crumbling dynasty. And I was merely the crack in the foundation threatening collapse. He believed he was moments from signing authority, granting legal guardianship over my autonomy and fortune. He believed the $5 million remaining in the estate would soon rest entirely in his grasp. He believed absolute control was only minutes away. A cold, razor-sharp clarity settled slowly into my chest without warning. It wasn't adrenaline rushing, was the quiet snap of a trap locking permanently into place. He mistook my silence for surrender and submission. He had no awareness. It was the precise sound of a scope aligning carefully on target. "Proceed," I said calmly, lowering myself back into my chair without haste. "Let's hear everything else, Your Honor," I added with measured patience. "Look at her lifestyle," Walter scoffed bitterly, gesturing toward me as if I were a blemish. "She resides in a cramped apartment in the most undesirable neighborhood here. She dresses exclusively from clearance racks and forgotten discount bins downtown. She rides public transportation because she lacks funds for a personal vehicle. She has wasted every opportunity I generously provided throughout her entire adulthood." I listened as he recited my alleged failures like mundane grocery items. But my thoughts drifted back exactly 2 years. I remembered the afternoon he arrived unannounced at my modest apartment doorway. He surveyed my tiny 300-square-foot studio with unfiltered contempt etched clearly across his face. "This is humiliating, Roddy," he had muttered, kicking aside a stack of neatly arranged books. "I tell colleagues you're finding direction, yet we both know you're failing." Then he sped away in a pristine Porsche Cayenne, gleaming beneath sunlight. I later discovered he'd leased that vehicle fraudulently using my Social Security. He never realized the shoebox apartment was a deliberate strategic decision. While he purchased $5,000 suits to impress resentful acquaintances who despised him, I constructed an invisible financial ledger quietly. Each time he called me worthless and incapable, I transferred another $5,000 into offshore investments. Every instance he mocked my mundane data entry position. I was discreetly overseeing a $15 million private portfolio. I wasn't impoverished. I was accumulating silently. I wasn't collapsing. I was acquiring strategically. He assumed I rode the bus due to inability to afford transportation. In truth, I deployed liquid capital, purchasing the distressed mortgage note tied to his cherished country club membership. When he ridiculed my thrift store blazer publicly, I finalized acquisition paperwork for the Shell Corporation holding liens on his office property. He saw a daughter requiring supervision and control. I saw a liability demanding immediate liquidation measures. "She lacks any comprehension of fiscal responsibility," Walter shouted angrily, striking the table with force. I looked at him, truly observed him carefully. This was not paternal concern expressed desperately for a struggling child. This was a parasite panicking as its host began steadily drying up. He didn't seek conservatorship out of affection or protective parental devotion. He sought it because he was submerged deeply in escalating, suffocating debt. And I remained his final accessible lifeboat. He required legal authority over my assets because his were already exhausted. He wasn't a parent. He was a calculated predator. And that realization left me entirely free of remorse or hesitation. If I had simply been a daughter today, perhaps I would hesitate. Perhaps I would attempt to rescue him once more from himself. But today, I wasn't his daughter in court. I was his primary secured creditor of record, and today wasn't reunion. Was formal foreclosure. "Is that everything, Mr. Walter?" Judge Morrison asked evenly, her pen scratching sharply across paper. "No," Walter replied slowly, a dangerous gleam surfacing within his calculating eyes. He gestured subtly toward Stephen, with quiet command. "We possess evidence proving her incompetence beyond doubt. Irrefutable documentation," he emphasized. Stephen rose abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. He avoided my gaze. He approached the bench and presented a thick bundle of financial statements to Judge Morrison carefully. "Your Honor," Stephen began, his voice quivering almost imperceptibly with restrained tension, "we are submitting evidence regarding the reckless handling of the trust fund established by the late grandmother, specifically the primary disbursement account." Walter didn't allow the attorney time to complete his formal statement calmly. Abruptly interrupted, thrusting a trembling finger directly toward my face. "She squandered it, Judge. She lost $750,000 and never even realized." A stunned gasp rippled throughout the packed courtroom like sudden cold wind. My aunts instinctively clutched their pearl necklaces tightly. My cousins traded alarmed, wide-eyed glances filled with shock and disbelief. To them, $750,000 represented unimaginable generational wealth. To Walter, it represented the final barrier between him and total insolvency. "Explain," Judge Morrison said, turning pages carefully one after another without expression. Her face remained composed, carefully neutral and unreadable. "Examine the transfers." Walter barked loudly, discarding any remaining courtroom decorum. "Within the past 24 months, enormous amounts have been wired outward. Oh, 50,000. Here, 80,000 there, large figures disappearing repeatedly. All directed toward shell corporations with layered ownership, all practically impossible to immediately trace." And she responded with absolute indifference and silence. Okay. No police filings submitted, no fraud alerts triggered, no internal investigations initiated. Nothing whatsoever was done. He pivoted dramatically toward the gallery seats, addressing his captive audience. "My daughter is so mentally absent, so detached from financial reality, that she permitted criminals to empty her inheritance. If responsible adults fail to intervene immediately, she will be destitute within 6 short months." I observed his performance carefully from my chair. It was disturbingly brilliant in its calculated cruelty. He was disguising his own embezzlement as evidence of my alleged incompetence. He relied on the assumption that any rational person would react explosively to such massive losses. Therefore, I must be irrational and unstable. Therefore, authority must be transferred directly to him without hesitation. "We are submitting an emergency motion to the court at this time," Stephen added nervously. He wiped perspiration from his upper lip with a trembling hand. "We request an immediate freeze on all related assets and financial accounts. Additionally, we seek appointment of Walter as temporary conservator to prevent further financial deterioration." Walter finally turned his gaze toward me. There was no paternal worry reflected in it. There was only victory, sharp and prematurely. Satisfied? He believed he had strategically cornered me completely. He believed the vanished funds served as irrefutable proof of my incapacity. He failed to recognize they were intentionally placed bait. He was correct regarding one specific detail. The funds were indeed no longer in that account balance. But he was profoundly mistaken about the negligence. He presumed I lacked basic intelligence to review account statements regularly. He assumed I remained the same timid daughter he once intimidated publicly. "Miss Roddy," Judge Morrison said gravely, her tone measured and serious, "these financial documents reflect substantial depletion of trust assets recently. Can you provide clarification regarding the destination of these transferred funds?" The courtroom descended into absolute suffocating silence. Walter leaned backward, confidently, folding his arms tightly across his tailored suit. He anticipated hesitation. He anticipated trembling. He anticipated tears and confused admissions of ignorance and helplessness. He anticipated victory. I rose steadily from my seat. Without hurry. I did not consult my prepared notes beside me on the table. I did not glance toward my attorney for reassurance. I picked up a single blue folder I had placed carefully on the table at the start of the hearing. "I don't have an explanation." "Your Honor," I stated calmly and distinctly, "I have a map." I approached. The bench set the folder before Judge Morrison deliberately. I did not hurry. I moved with intentional slowness of someone who already knew the ending because they authored it. "My father is correct." "Your Honor," I continued, turning slightly toward the gallery seated behind me, "the money is gone. $750,000 exited that trust account over 2 years. I observed every single cent depart in silence. Walter released a sharp, mocking burst of laughter. She admits it openly. She watched it vanish and remained completely inactive. She's catatonic and unstable. I wasn't catatonic. Corrected evenly. My voice slicing through his outburst like polished steel. I was patient. Judge Morrison opened the folder slowly and studied. The first sheet, her eyes widened subtly as comprehension settled across her composed expression. It was not a standard financial spreadsheet. It was a detailed map displaying digital footprints in layered visual patterns. "Miss Roddy," the judge asked, carefully lifting her gaze toward me, "what exactly am I examining within these pages?" "You are viewing IP logs for each unauthorized transaction executed against the trust account." I explained precisely. I didn't merely trace the funds themselves. I traced the originating device and connection points. Every single transaction originated from one desktop computer registered consistently. That device is located at 442 Oakwood Drive. That address is my father's residence, specifically his private study room. Walter's complexion drained. Instantly a visible color. He began to rise from his chair abruptly. But Stephen forcefully pulled him back into place. "That's fabricated evidence," Walter sputtered desperately. "She manufactured those logs and manipulated the data." And here I continued calmly, indicating the next organized page in sequence. "These are official wire transfer confirmations issued directly by the bank. You will observe the funds were not dispersed to arbitrary shell corporations. They were directed toward accounts held under Apex Consulting as beneficiary, a company formally registered in Nevis offshore jurisdiction." I turned deliberately toward Walter once more. "A corporation you established 3 years ago using your mistress's maiden name." The gallery exploded into shocked, disordered murmurs. My aunt released an audible, startled gasp loudly. Walter appeared physically struck, though punched sharply in the abdomen. He opened his mouth, yet no coherent sound emerged from his lips. He understood far too late that I had never overlooked his theft. I had been meticulously documenting every calculated move. "But why?" Judge Morrison asked firmly, raising her hand to restore silence. "If you possessed knowledge of his actions, Miss Roddy, why refrain from freezing the account earlier? Why permit nearly $1 million to disappear?" This was the decisive moment I had engineered. The honeypot strategy unfolding because of statutory thresholds. "Your Honor," I responded clearly, without hesitation. "Had I intervened at $50,000, it would constitute a civil disagreement only. It would remain categorized as a private family financial dispute. He would receive minimal penalties, perhaps probation and a negligible fine. Within 6 months, he would reappear attempting to exploit me again." I looked directly at Walter across the courtroom. I wanted comprehension to dawn slowly within his unraveling mind. I required him to cross the boundary between petty theft and federal racketeering violations. I've intentionally disabled all automated security alerts. I deliberately left the digital door unsecured. I waited patiently until the cumulative stolen amount surpassed $500,000 substantially, and until transactions crossed multiple state jurisdictions. I leaned forward slightly, placing both hands firmly upon the counsel table. Asterisk that establishes a sustained pattern of interstate wire fraud substantial enough to initiate a RICO case. The mandatory minimum sentence carries 10 years within federal prison custody, no parole eligibility, no probation arrangements. Walter sagged backward into his chair heavily. Asterisk. He appeared diminished suddenly. He looked like someone realizing he hadn't robbed a bank vault. He had been stealing directly from a carefully engineered trap. "I didn't lose $750,000, Dad," I said quietly, my tone cold and irrevocably final. "I spent it deliberately. That was the cost of securing your prison sentence effectively and honestly. It was a remarkably inexpensive bargain." Walter was cornered tightly, but a cornered rat becomes exceptionally dangerous. He wiped perspiration from his brow using a trembling, unsteady hand. Then he reached slowly into his leather briefcase. He removed one solitary sheet of aged paper. Its edges were slightly yellowed with passing time. "She's lying," he declared, his voice regaining sudden force and volume. "She authorized every transfer. She simply forgot approving them." He handed the document to the bailiff carefully. The bailiff delivered it forward to the judge. Walter turned toward the gallery behind him. His confidence returned rapidly, like a fever spreading through blood. "This is a power of attorney document executed and notarized 2 years ago. It clearly grants me complete authority over that specific trust account management." She signed it shortly after her grandmother passed away unexpectedly. She was emotionally overwhelmed and incapable of handling complex financial decisions then. Judge Morrison studied the paper with scrutiny. A slight frown formed across her composed face. "The signature appears authentic." "It is authentic," Walter replied quickly, smiling broadly for the first time. "She signed willingly. She simply cannot. Remember, this validates my argument, Your Honor, entirely. Her memory has deteriorated. She's dissociating from reality. She fabricates paranoid theories about federal RICO charges because she refuses confronting the truth of consent." The atmosphere shifted again inside the silent courtroom. I noticed my cousins leaning close, whispering doubts. Maybe he's correct. Maybe she's genuinely confused. Even Stephen, perspiring earlier, straightened his posture, renewed hope flickering visibly. If that document survived legal scrutiny intact, then no theft occurred. It would constitute authorized financial management exclusively. My RICO strategy would dissolve instantly into nothingness. The honeypot would become entirely meaningless and wasted. Judge Morrison directed her gaze toward me. "Miss Roddy, is this indeed your signature here?" I recognized the document immediately upon seeing it. 2 years prior, concealed within stacks of funeral administrative paperwork. Walter had slid it quietly before me then. I signed without reviewing. A mistake that ignited this calculated war. "It resembles my signature," I answered evenly, without visible hesitation. Walter lunged verbally. "See, she acknowledges it. She's forgetful and unstable. She clearly requires supervision. She desperately needs guardianship." He believed victory arrived. I allowed him a single breath of illusion. Then I opened my bag, deliberately, and withdrew another organized folder. "That document grants control over one isolated account," I informed him calmly, "but it does not grant shelter or residence." I disclosed the remainder of the truth plainly. I had quietly purchased his law office building months earlier through intermediaries. He had neglected paying rent for several consecutive months without awareness. An eviction notice was filed officially that morning. Additionally, I acquired the mortgage note on his personal residence. "I own your office. I own your home. I own your accumulated debt. You arrive seeking guardianship. You depart today as my tenant, legally bound." He visibly unraveled. The courtroom witnessed his ego fracture publicly. I slid a withdrawal agreement and written confession across the polished table. "Sign it now. It's 30 days to vacate. Refuse compliance. And the locks change before noon tomorrow." He signed reluctantly, muttering I would always remain indebted to him. Suddenly the courtroom doors swung open forcefully. Federal marshals entered, accompanied by the U.S. Attorney. Walter was apprehended immediately at the table. Perjury triggered activation of a sealed indictment I had reported months prior. No relative defended him as he was escorted out in restraints. Outside, the air felt startlingly cleaner somehow. I finalized the sale of his residence swiftly. I deleted his contact number permanently from memory. Then I walked away without glancing backward. Peace isn't given, you seize it deliberately. And sometimes true strength means allowing them to bury themselves completely,